Welcome everyone to this episode of Rig Crafting. I'm the Rig Crafting Dad, and in this episode we're going to take the components of this Dell OptiPlex 7020 and put them into this Jonsbo D31 case. The components themselves are still useful, they still have some life left in them, and so we're going to give this rig new life by putting it into this beautiful new white case. There are a few caveats. The OptiPlex power supplies, the cables themselves to run to the motherboard and the CPU plug are short, so we will need a longer CPU extension cable. And the I/O ports on these OptiPlexes have some caveats on the motherboard, and I'll show you what those are later in this video. Alright, so we got our case open, and we've got lots of wires here. So we've got our intrusion detection, we've got our power supply cable here, and we've got our case fan. On this side, we've got a bunch of different cables. You've got your SATA cables, you've got your power supply. This is an 8-pin. We'll get to that in a little bit. And actually, the SATA power cables are 6-pin. We've got our memory. We've got our front USB ports, audio, and then we've got this special Dell connector here that we'll talk about a little bit later. Speaker, and then we actually have a temperature sensor. Those are all kind of important, and when we move all these components to the new case, we'll have to do a few things with those. Alright, we've got all of our screws out, our motherboard is free. We're going to grab the CPU cooler here and we're going to slowly slide it backwards. Okay, and then we're just going to slide it right out. Alright, so we've got most of our components out. We're going to talk about the power button, CD drive. There's a temperature sensor in here and the I/O ports. So to remove the CD drive, you're just going to pull this lever down and the drive will move forward and you can slide that right out. We'll just set that aside. The power button here, you'll need a small flathead screwdriver. There are two pins on either side, the top and the bottom. Just put a little bit of pressure on both sides and it'll come loose. And now you can feed the power button all the way through, like so. So what's interesting about these Dells is there's a couple components that are required upon boot that the system checks. One of those is the temperature sensor. That's what this little guy is here. So we're actually going to move that to our new PC, and you can see there's one clip here, and then there's just an L bracket that kind of holds it in place. So we'll move that to our new case. So we'll set that aside. The I/O for the front panel, as well as all the LEDs and stuff, we're going to leave those in the case. We already have a new I/O that is the same connector in our Jonsbo case. The LEDs, on the other hand, this is a custom pinout, and when we put the system in, the motherboard in the new case, I'll talk about how we can solve that problem. Alright, so we've got all of our components out. Here's what we've got left. We've got our I/O shield. I didn't show you pulling it out, but just put some pressure on it from the back and it'll push into the case. It is aluminum. Be careful of the edges. This is where most people get a few cuts and scratches. We've got our motherboard, CPU memory, our hard drive. We've got our SATA cables. We've got one SATA cable for the hard drive, our temperature sensor, power supply, and our screw. Alright, this is the Jonsbo D31 case. This is the first time I'm actually using it. This is a pretty decent case. This is not something that I'm going to review. There are probably other videos that review it. but I just want to talk about a few things. There are no screws that hold on the sides, so just be careful when you pull them off and you're manipulating the PC if you're moving it. While I don't expect that these will fall off, just know that they're not secured by screws. On the inside, we've got our motherboard spot. We've got over here on the left, this is where our power supply is going to go. Alright, so we got our I/O shield in. Thankfully I got it in without any cuts. So just be careful when you install it because they are sharp edges. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to install our motherboard. Some of these cases come with standoffs pre-installed. We want to make sure that all the standoffs are correct for the holes that we're going to be securing our motherboard to. So I usually take the motherboard, put it in just to see that all the holes line up. And I can see here we're missing a standoff. So your packaging should come with some additional standoffs. Alright, so we've got our additional standoff in, so now we can install the motherboard. So just make sure your I/O shield and ports line up. So put the back in first and just make sure again that all of your holes line up. You're going to screw in all the screws one at a time. Don't tighten them all down until you've got all the screws in. That way you know that all of your holes line up appropriately. Alright, we're going to install the power supply into the cage that's going to hang on the front of the power supply. Because this power supply is in the case comes with an extension cable, and there's an orientation to the plug. So just make sure that you install the plug in the correct orientation in the drive cage, otherwise you'll have to be like me and unscrew it and do it all over again. Alright, so we've got our power supply in the drive cage. We're going to install it in the case. Like I had mentioned earlier, this one comes with an extension cable, so we're going to plug that in now, just so we don't forget and doesn't get hung up on anything. So plug that in here. And this case comes with the ability to mount the power supply at different heights, so depending on whether or not you have a GPU or other hardware in your case, you can mount it at different heights. We don't really care, so we're just going to put it at the maximum height possible. So that's going to hang on the front, and then we've got two screws that will attach the cage to the front. Alright, so here's the extension cable for the power supply. Depending on the height that you attach the power supply, you'll have some left over. I just did a simple loop and just kind of wedged it in there. So for cable management, it's pretty simple. Okay, so we've got our power supply in. Now we're going to connect all of our cables. And at the beginning of the video, like I said, there's a couple things that you needed for this build that were in addition to just the components that were in the case, and that is a jumper, and this is a 25 pack. You can get these from Micro Center, and then you also need a power extension cable. So we've got our 4-pin power cable, and obviously it cannot reach the 4-pin that's over here. So we're gonna route our 8-pin motherboard connector here through the loop. We're going to plug that in, and then we're going to open our extension cable. We're going to plug that in. And this is only 8 inches. It's not quite enough to route around the back, so we're just going to have to route this over the front, and we'll plug that in like that. Not the prettiest thing, but unless you have a longer cable, which you can probably pick up on Amazon or elsewhere, then that's what we'll just have to do. Okay, so in the beginning of the video I talked about some caveats to the headers that you would be plugging in your front USB ports and audio into. So because this is an older motherboard, it doesn't support USB-C. Most new cases come with a USB-C header, so we're not going to be able to use that. You can buy expansion cards that would allow you to plug it in, but for this build, we're just going to set that aside. The USB port header, we can use that. Dell has standardized on that, so at least we can use that one. And then the audio, in this particular motherboard, Dell used a smaller pinout and a proprietary connector. So unless we have some special adapter, we're not actually going to be able to use the audio header on the front either. The last is the power and LED for the power button. We can use the power button that is supplied. The LEDs for the power button we probably won't be able to. And jumpers that I talked about earlier, that is because Dell does some checks at boot for the power button and for the USB and audio header. So there's specific jumpers that you have to cross in order to get rid of those warnings, and I'll show those in more detail when we connect those things. So Dell has this 5-pin proprietary power button connector. It includes the LEDs and has multiple lights so it can support error codes and things. We don't need all that, but we do need to jumper the middle two jumpers, and the end two are actually the power button. So in order to do that, we actually have to take the plastic shroud out from around it. So I just have some needle nose pliers here, and I'm just going to work it back and forth. Go slow so you don't bend or break any of the pins, and it'll pop right off. So now you can see we've got the 5 pins, and we're going to take one of our little jumpers, and we're going to jumper the 2 middle ones together, so, and then we're going to take our power connector and we're going to connect it to the last 2 pins. Okay, so the other thing that Dell checks for is the temperature of the PC to make sure that there's enough airflow through the PC case. So that's what this little cable is. If you don't have this plugged in, you will get an error code when you boot, so we need to make sure that we include this in the new build. It's pretty easy. You've got this 2-pin header here. You're just going to plug it back in, and you're going to route your cable through the PC case. So there we go. And I usually just route it through however you want to make it look pretty. And because we're not using the front here for a fan, we can just actually stick the little sensor through the hole there, and you can secure it to the front with a zip tie or just some wire so that it holds it in place. Alright, so now we're ready to mount our hard drive and plug in our cables. So on this Jonsbo, you've got 2 places here where you can mount 2.5-inch drives. We're going to mount ours right here, and then we're going to plug in our cables after. You can see here that there's some cables. We're going to do some cleanup after we get all the drives in and plug the rest of our cables in. Alright, so we've gotten our PC together. We actually moved the fan from the old Dell OptiPlex. It's attached with some rubber brackets. Mine were so old that when I tried to remove the fan, they just broke. So you'll probably need some extra screws to fix it to the case. For now, it's just kind of hanging there. So now, moment of truth, we're going to plug it in and see if it works. The first boot may take some time. and you may get some warnings, but don't worry about those. Just take them as they come. Some of the things that we modified for the jumpers, if you haven't done that, then you will definitely see some warnings on the post. So we're in Windows, so everything checks out. So we're going to close everything up, and then we'll give you one last look at how it looks. Break Crafting Dad. At the beginning of this video, I talked about one of the caveats to the I/O ports on these Jonsbo D31 case and the Dell OptiPlex. So one of those things that I'm going to go over is the USB-C. For the Jonsbo, we cannot plug the provided USB-C into the older Dell OptiPlex. There just isn't a port for it. So you can purchase this USB-C header on Amazon, and this will convert your USB-C into the available port on the motherboard, which is USB. The other part of the caveat here is that if you're using that USB-C header, you then cannot plug in the provided USB header that comes with the Jonsbo case. So I purchased this adapter. It simply plugs into your USB header provided by your case, and then it converts it to standard USB internal header. The other part here is this breakout board. The Dell OptiPlex has a miniature version of its own breakout board, and standard connectors just won't fit. So this little breakout board provides all the needed connectivity, including your hard drive LED, your USB 2, and your audio for connecting your internal audio connector. The one caveat to this, I had to clip one of the pins. It is marked, so just know that you will have to clip one of the pins if you're going to use your internal HD audio. Just like that. So now that we got everything connected, you can see what it looks like. So here's the breakout board. Here's the USB-C connector here. So it all looks clean, and we can use all the ports on the front of our PC.